The massive space station hung in the void like a jeweled crown, its countless lights twinkling against the star-filled darkness. Ships from 100 different worlds docked at its ports, each one carrying representatives from species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. The Galactic Council Station was older than human civilization, and everyone who approached it felt small in comparison. Marcus Kane stood at the observation deck of the human vessel Prometheus, watching the station grow larger as they approached. He wore a simple black suit, perfectly tailored and pristine. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, and his hands were clasped behind his back in a relaxed posture. To anyone watching, he looked like exactly what he was supposed to be, Earth's first diplomatic representative to the galaxy. "Nervous, Ambassador?" asked Captain Rodriguez from behind him. Kane turned slightly, offering a small smile. "Not particularly, Captain, though I suspect the next few days will be interesting." The captain studied Kane's calm expression. In all the months of preparation for this mission, she had never seen the man show even a hint of stress. Not during the grueling briefings, not during the hostile questioning from Earth's government, and not now, as they approached what could be humanity's most important moment in history. "The intelligence reports say most of the Council species consider us primitives," Rodriguez said. "Some of them have been spacefaring for millions of years. They might not even take our petition seriously." Kane nodded thoughtfully. "That's entirely possible. But Earth's government sent me here for a reason, Captain. They believe diplomacy is our best path forward." What the captain didn't know, what very few people knew, was exactly why Earth's government had chosen Marcus Kane for this mission. His diplomatic credentials were real enough, but they were recent additions to a much longer and more complex resume. 2 hours later, Kane walked alone through the docking tube that connected the Prometheus to the Council Station. His single piece of luggage was a small briefcase containing humanity's formal petition for membership. He had declined the security escort that protocol suggested, stating that he preferred to make a peaceful first impression. The station's interior was breathtaking. Corridors stretched in impossible directions, their walls made of materials that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Gravity worked differently in different sections, and the air itself felt alive with energy. Beings of every conceivable shape and size moved through the passages, some walking, others floating, still others moving in ways that had no human equivalent. Kane's escort was a tall, blue-skinned humanoid with forearms and eyes like black pearls. She introduced herself as Diplomatic Aide Velna of the Altarian Republic. "You are much smaller than we expected," Velna said as they walked. "The reports suggested humans were larger creatures." "We come in various sizes," Kane replied pleasantly. "I hope that won't be a problem." "The Council has debated your species for several cycles already," Velna continued. "Many members question whether mammals possess sufficient intelligence for galactic citizenship. Others wonder if your violent history disqualifies you entirely." Kane's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes for just a moment. "I hope to address those concerns during our discussions." They entered a vast chamber that took Kane's breath away despite his training. The council hall was a sphere nearly a kilometer across, with delegates seated on platforms that floated at different levels throughout the space. Thousands of beings filled the chamber, representing every major species in the galaxy. The diversity was staggering. Crystalline entities that looked like living gemstones, gaseous beings contained in mechanical suits, creatures that defied easy description, and dozens of variations on more familiar themes. At the center of the sphere was a speaking platform, and Kane realized that was where he would need to make humanity's case. "The human representative has arrived," announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Conversations died as thousands of alien eyes turned toward Kane. As he was guided to the central platform, Kane could hear fragments of discussion from the nearest delegates. The comments ranged from curious to dismissive to openly hostile. "Look how fragile it appears," hissed a reptilian creature with scales like black mirrors. "Biped, design is so inefficient," clicked something that looked like a mechanical spider the size of a house. "I've heard they still fight wars among their own species," rumbled a being that seemed to be made of living rock. Kane reached the speaking platform and activated the translation device that would allow every species present to understand him. The massive chamber fell silent, and he found himself at the center of attention for representatives of countless worlds. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Kane began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. I am Marcus Kane, speaking on behalf of the human species and the planet Earth. We come before you today not as conquerors or suppliants, but as neighbors hoping to join the galactic community. A being near the top of the chamber, with a body like silver liquid held in a transparent shell, spoke up. Human Kane, your species has existed in space for barely a century. Many of us have been traveling between stars since before your son was born. What makes you think you are ready for council membership? Kane smiled politely. Respected counselor, we don't claim to have your experience or wisdom, but we offer something perhaps equally valuable, a fresh perspective, and a genuine desire to contribute to galactic peace and prosperity. Laughter echoed from several sections of the chamber, though it came in forms Kane didn't recognize. A massive creature with too many teeth spoke in a voice like grinding stone. Peace? Your species has been at war for its entire recorded history. You bring violence wherever you go. That's true, Kane admitted, surprising many delegates. Humans have fought many wars, but we've also learned from them. Our greatest achievements have often come from recognizing our mistakes and choosing better paths forward. A crystalline being that sparkled like a diamond spoke next, its voice like chiming bells. Your technology is primitive. Your understanding of physics is childlike. Your social structures are chaotic. What could such a species possibly contribute to our ancient civilization? Kane maintained his calm expression as more criticisms came from around the chamber. They questioned humanity's intelligence, their emotional stability, their technological development, and their worthiness to exist alongside more advanced species. Some delegates spoke with clinical detachment, others with barely concealed contempt. Through it all, Kane listened carefully and responded thoughtfully. He acknowledged humanity's limitations while highlighting their potential. He spoke of human creativity, adaptability, and determination. He mentioned their rapid technological progress and their capacity for growth. What none of the delegates noticed was that Kane never seemed nervous. His heart rate never increased, his hands never trembled, and his voice never wavered. For someone supposedly facing the most important moment in his species' history, he seemed remarkably composed. We understand your concerns, Kane said as the initial round of questions ended. We know we have much to learn, but we also believe we have much to offer. Humanity asks only for the chance to prove ourselves worthy of your trust. The session ended with no immediate decision. Kane was informed that the council would deliberate for several days before rendering their judgment. As he was escorted to temporary quarters, he could hear the debates beginning behind him. Alone in his assigned room, Kane removed his jacket and hung it carefully in the closet. He loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms that were more muscular than his suit had suggested. For the first time since arriving, he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. The first day had gone exactly as Earth's government had expected. The council saw humans as primitive, weak, and possibly dangerous in their ignorance. They had no idea what they were really dealing with. Kane hoped it would stay that way. 3 days passed in a blur of formal meetings and diplomatic discussions. Kane met with representatives from dozens of species, each session revealing more about the complex politics that governed the galaxy. Some delegates were genuinely curious about humanity, asking thoughtful questions about Earth's culture and history. Others barely concealed their disdain, treating the meetings as an unfortunate obligation. The Zephyrians were among the most hostile. Their representative, a tall being with purple skin and silver eyes, made no effort to hide his contempt during their private session. Your species is a mistake, he said bluntly. Mammals should have remained in the trees where they belong. The council has no place for creatures driven by primitive emotions and base instincts. Kane responded with the same diplomatic patience he had shown everywhere else. I understand your concerns, Counselor Vex. Perhaps time will prove that humans can rise above their origins. The crystalline Vorthons were more subtle, but equally dismissive. Their delegate, a being that looked like a walking sculpture of blue crystal, spoke in musical tones that the translator rendered as polite condescension. Humans are interesting, she chimed, like watching children play with tools they don't understand. Amusing, but hardly suitable for serious galactic affairs. Kane smiled and nodded, taking notes as if these insults were valuable feedback. His calm responses seemed to frustrate some delegates. as if they had expected anger or defensiveness that they could use against him. On the third evening, Kane was reviewing his daily reports when his door chimed. The visitor was unexpected. Commander Thrak of the Drakmari Imperium, a species known throughout the galaxy as elite warriors. Thrak stood nearly 3 meters tall with gray skin covered in natural armor plates and eyes like burning coals. Human diplomat, Thrak rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. I bring an invitation. Kane set down his tablet and gestured to a chair, though Thrak remained standing. What kind of invitation, Commander? A cultural exchange, Thrak said, though something in his tone suggested it was anything but cultural. Several council members are curious about human capabilities. We wish to understand your species better before the final vote. Kane studied the Drakmari warrior carefully. Everything about Thrak's posture and expression suggested this was not a friendly social gathering, but Kane's face showed only polite interest. That sounds like an excellent opportunity for mutual understanding, Kane said. When and where? Now, Thrak replied. Lower levels of the station. Section C7. We have prepared a demonstration area. Kane stood and reached for his jacket. As he slipped it on, he asked casually, Should I bring anything specific? Documentation, perhaps? Just yourself, Thrak said, and there was something predatory in his smile. They left Kane's quarters together, Thrak leading the way through corridors that grew progressively less populated as they descended into the station's lower levels. Kane noticed that the normal security checkpoints were absent, and the few beings they passed looked away quickly when they saw Thrak. Tell me about Drakmari culture, Kane said as they walked. I've read that your people value strength above all else. Strength, honor, and the willingness to face death without fear, Thrak confirmed. These are the qualities that matter in the galaxy, not words or promises or diplomatic niceties. They entered a section of the station that Kane hadn't seen before. The walls were darker here, made of some kind of black metal that seemed to absorb light. The corridors were wider, designed for industrial purposes rather than comfort. Many council members question whether humans possess true strength, Thrak continued. Your species talks much of peace and cooperation. But what happens when peaceful words fail? What happens when you face real danger? Kane considered this. I suppose we adapt to the circumstances. They reached a heavy blast door marked with warnings in multiple languages. Thrak pressed his palm to a scanner, and the door slid open with a deep rumble. Beyond was a large cargo bay, empty except for a handful of other Drakmari warriors waiting inside. Kane paused at the threshold, taking in the scene. 5 more Drakmari stood in a loose circle around the center of the bay, all armed with energy weapons and wearing combat armor. The blast doors sealed behind him with a sound like a vault closing. A test, Thrak announced, his friendly pretense dropping away entirely. The council must know what humans are truly made of. If your diplomat cannot survive a simple combat trial, then your species has no place among us. Kane sighed softly and began removing his jacket with the same careful precision he had shown when hanging it in his quarters. He folded it neatly and set it aside, then loosened his tie. Commander Thrak, Kane said politely, I should mention that Earth's government specifically instructed me to handle all interactions diplomatically. They were quite insistent about this. The Drakmari warriors laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Thrak hefted his plasma rifle, its charging coils beginning to glow. Your government isn't here, human. Down here there are no witnesses, no recordings, no diplomatic protocols. There is only strength or weakness. Victory or death. Kane rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms that were more heavily muscled than his suit had suggested. For the first time since arriving at the station, his expression began to change. The diplomatic smile faded, replaced by something cooler and more focused. I understand your position, Kane said quietly, and I appreciate the directness, but I really must insist that you reconsider this course of action. Why? Thrak demanded, raising his weapon. Kane's eyes went completely cold, and when he spoke, his voice carried an undertone that made the Drakmari unconsciously step back. Because Earth's government didn't send me here despite my background, Commander. They sent me here because of it. Thrak's finger moved toward the trigger of his plasma rifle. What background? Kane's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. To an untrained eye, he still looked like a diplomat in shirt sleeves. But something fundamental had changed in the way he held himself, the way he balanced his weight, the way his eyes tracked movement around the room. Before I became Earth's diplomatic representative, Kane said, his voice now completely devoid of emotion, I had another job. I was very good at it. What job? Thrax snarled, though uncertainty was creeping into his voice. Kane smiled, but it was nothing like the polite diplomatic expression he had worn for 3 days. This smile was sharp, cold, and utterly without mercy. Asset elimination, Kane said simply. The first plasma bolt fired before Thrax finished processing what Kane had said. But Kane was no longer standing where he had been a moment before. The bolt scorched empty air while Kane moved with a speed and precision that defied human limitations. What happened next wasn't a fight. It was a lesson in why some humans were more dangerous than entire armies. The Drakmari warriors were elite soldiers, trained from birth in combat techniques that had been perfected over millennia. Their weapons could vaporize steel, their armor could deflect starship cannons, and their reflexes were enhanced by genetic modification. None of it mattered. Kane moved through them like death itself, turning their own weapons against them, using their armor's weight against their balance, exploiting weaknesses they didn't know they had. He fought with an economy of motion that spoke of extensive training and practical experience. Every movement served a purpose, every strike was precisely calculated, and every tactical decision was made with perfect clarity. When the last Drakmari warrior hit the floor, Kane straightened his tie and retrieved his jacket. Thrax lay unconscious against a wall, his armor cracked and his weapon in pieces beside him. Kane put his jacket back on and smoothed down his hair, transforming back into the mild-mannered diplomat who had entered the bay minutes earlier. He activated his communication device and called for medical assistance, reporting a regrettable training accident in Section C7. As he waited for the medical teams to arrive, Kane looked down at Thrax's unconscious form and spoke quietly. I tried to warn you, Commander. Earth's government really did want this handled diplomatically. The blast doors opened as the first medical teams arrived. Kane stepped aside to let them work, his expression once again showing nothing but diplomatic concern for the injured warriors. But word was already spreading through the station's communication networks. The human diplomat had just single-handedly defeated an entire squad of Drakmari elite warriors, and he had done it while wearing a business suit. The news spread through the council station like wildfire. Within hours, every delegate knew that the human diplomat had destroyed a squad of Drakmari warriors without breaking a sweat. The details grew more dramatic with each telling, but the core facts remained consistent. 6 elite soldiers had tried to kill Marcus Kane, and all 6 were now in the medical bay. Kane returned to his quarters as if nothing unusual had happened. He filed a formal complaint about the misunderstanding with the Drakmari delegation and requested replacement security escorts for future cultural exchanges. Then he ordered dinner from the station's commissary and spent the evening reading diplomatic protocols. The reaction from the council was immediate and divided. Emergency sessions were called, with delegates arguing in a dozen different languages about what the incident meant. Some species demanded Kane's immediate arrest and execution. Others wanted him studied to understand how a baseline human could achieve such results. A few quietly began reconsidering their positions on human membership entirely. The Zephyrian delegate, who had been among the most vocal opponents of human membership, stood before an emergency assembly and declared the human a clear threat to galactic security. This creature is not a diplomat, Councillor Vex announced, his silver eyes blazing with fury. It is a weapon disguised as a representative. No true diplomat could have done what it did to train Drakmari warriors. The crystalline Vorthan delegate chimed in agreement, her voice like breaking glass. The humans' actions prove that their species is fundamentally violent. They sent us a killer and called it an ambassador, but not all reactions were hostile. The Altarian representative who had originally escorted Kane spoke up in defense. The Drakmari attacked first, diplomatic aide Velna pointed out. The human was defending himself. Are we to punish beings for refusing to die quietly? This sparked another round of heated debate. Some delegates argued that Kane's response was disproportionate, that a true diplomat would have found a peaceful solution. Others pointed out that 6 armed warriors attacking 1 unarmed individual hardly qualified as a fair fight. Through it all, Kane maintained his normal routine. He attended scheduled meetings, answered questions with polite professionalism, and showed no sign that anything had changed. When asked directly about the incident, he expressed regret that the cultural exchange had ended in violence and hoped that future interactions would be more peaceful. But the station's security forces were watching him now. Cameras tracked his movements, sensors monitored his biometrics, and guards followed at a discreet distance. What they observed only deepened the mystery. Kane's heart rate never elevated even when discussing the combat. His stress hormones remained at baseline levels throughout interrogations that would have broken most beings. His sleep patterns were perfectly regular, and he showed no signs of post-combat trauma or anxiety. More disturbing were the small details that trained observers began to notice. Kane never sat with his back to a door. His eyes constantly tracked movement around him, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. He ate with one hand while keeping the other free, and he positioned himself in every room to have the best tactical advantage. These weren't the behaviors of a diplomat who had accidentally survived an attack. They were the habits of someone who lived in a constant state of readiness for violence. Commander Thrak recovered consciousness on the second day after the incident. His report to Drakmari High Command was brief and disturbing. "The human moves like death," Thrak told his superiors, his voice hoarse from his injuries. "I have fought in 100 battles, faced the deadliest creatures in the galaxy. I have never seen anything like what that being can do." "Explain," demanded General Korax, Thrak's commanding officer. Thrak struggled to find words. He fought as if gravity was optional, as if physics were merely suggestions. Our weapons might as well have been toys. Our armor might as well have been paper. He didn't just defeat us, he played with us. The general's eyes narrowed. "You're saying one human overcame 6 Drakmari warriors?" "I'm saying one human overcame 6 Drakmari warriors while wearing a business suit and never once losing his temper," Thrak clarified. When it was over, he straightened his tie and called for medical help, like he had just finished a mildly interesting conversation. Word of Thrak's report reached other delegations within hours. The mystery of Marcus Kane was becoming the most discussed topic on the station, overshadowing even the original question of human membership in the council. The mechanoid delegation, beings who had replaced most of their organic components with cybernetic enhancements, ran detailed analysis of the security footage from the cargo bay. Their conclusion was troubling. The humans' combat efficiency exceeded theoretical maximums for baseline organic beings, reported Processor Unit 7742. Either their species possesses capabilities we have not documented, or this individual represents something beyond normal human parameters. The gaseous ethereals, contained within their environmental suits, reached a similar conclusion through different means. They could sense electromagnetic patterns that other species missed, and Kane's readings were unlike anything in their databases. "The human's neural activity suggests extensive combat conditioning," whispered Voice of the Mists, the ethereal representative. "But more than conditioning. There are patterns we associate with entities who have transcended normal limitations through extreme experience." As the second day ended, a coalition of concerned species began forming. Led by the Zephyrians and supported by the Vorthans, Mechanoids, and others, they argued that Kane represented an immediate threat that needed to be eliminated before he could complete his mission. "If this is what Earth calls a diplomat," Counselor Vex declared in a closed session, "what do they call a soldier? What nightmares are they hiding on that primitive world?" The coalition began planning. If the Council couldn't officially act against Kane due to diplomatic immunity, then they would take matters into their own hands. A tragic accident could be arranged. Perhaps the human would suffer a life support failure, or maybe he would be found dead in his quarters from some exotic poison. They had no idea that Kane was already aware of their planning. His quarters were monitored, but so were theirs. The station's communication networks carried their encrypted messages, but Kane had access to decryption methods that shouldn't have existed outside of military intelligence operations. As he prepared for bed on the second night, Kane allowed himself another small, cold smile. The coalition was about to learn the same lesson as the Drakmari, but on a much larger scale. They thought they were hunting a diplomat who had gotten lucky once. What they were actually hunting was something far more dangerous. A human who had been killing people professionally for longer than some of their species had been spacefaring. Kane checked his watch and calculated the station's rotation schedule. The coalition would likely move during the night shift. when skeleton crews managed most systems and fewer witnesses would be around. They would come in force this time. Having learned from the Drakmari mistake, it wouldn't matter. Kane had been in worse situations than being trapped on a space station with enemies on all sides. He had survived those situations by being better at violence than anyone expected, and by never allowing his opponents to dictate the terms of engagement. The Coalition was planning to hunt him through the station's corridors, using their knowledge of the layout and their superior numbers to corner and eliminate him. Kane was planning to remind them why humans had become the dominant species on a planet where everything else was trying to kill them. The night shift began, and throughout the station, beings who thought they were predators began moving toward what they believed was prey. They were about to discover which was which. The attack came at Oro 300 station time, during the deepest part of the night cycle when most beings were either asleep or in their species' equivalent of rest. The Coalition had planned carefully, using their combined knowledge of the station's layout and systems to coordinate a systematic hunt. Kane wasn't in his quarters when they arrived. The first team consisted of Zephyrian commandos, elite soldiers trained in stealth operations. They bypassed the door locks with sophisticated equipment and entered Kane's room in perfect formation, weapons ready for immediate engagement. They found an empty bed, clothes laid out as if Kane had simply vanished from inside them. The bathroom was empty, the closet was undisturbed, and there was no sign of struggle or hasty departure. Target has vacated primary location, the team leader reported through encrypted channels. No indication of destination. What they didn't notice was that Kane had been watching them from inside the ventilation system directly above their heads. The station's environmental ducts were larger than those on human ships, designed to accommodate species of various sizes. For someone with Kane's training, they were highways that led everywhere on the station. The second team was Vorthan, crystalline beings whose natural armor made them nearly impervious to most weapons. They had been assigned to check the common areas and recreational facilities. They moved through the station's central hub with confidence, their forms refracting the dim emergency lighting into prismatic patterns. They never saw Kane coming. The first Vorthan simply stopped moving, his crystalline form darkening as his internal energy systems shut down. His companions spun around searching for threats but found only empty corridors and shadows. The second Vorthan fell 30 seconds later, then the third. Each one was disabled by precise strikes to energy nodes that most beings didn't even know existed. Kane had studied their anatomy during his diplomatic meetings, filing away information that proved useful now. The last Vorthan managed to trigger an alarm before Kane reached him, filling the station with the wailing sound of emergency alert sirens. But by then it was too late to matter. "This is Blue Team," came a panicked transmission over the Coalition's communication network. "We have multiple casualties. Repeat, we have casualties. The target is active and hostile." The mechanoid unit received this news with their typical analytical calm. Beings who had replaced emotion with logic, they recalculated their approach based on the new data. If the human was using guerrilla tactics, they would respond with systematic suppression. They deployed in a formation designed to control key corridors and eliminate hiding places. Their enhanced sensors could detect heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, and even subtle changes in air pressure. Nothing organic could hide from their detection grid. Kane wasn't hiding. The first indication that their plan had failed was when the station's gravity generators began fluctuating. Sections of corridor suddenly experienced zero gravity, while others tripled their normal pull. The mechanoids found themselves struggling to maintain formation as their environment became unpredictable. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red illumination that created deep shadows and confused electronic sensors. The mechanoids switched to alternative detection methods, but their equipment was being systematically jammed by signals coming from the station's own communication arrays. "Target has accessed station systems," Processor Unit 7742 reported, its voice betraying the first hint of uncertainty any mechanoid had shown in decades. "Recommend immediate withdrawal to defensible positions." But Kane wasn't giving them time to withdraw. The first mechanoid was taken down by its own weapon, somehow turned against it in a way that should have been impossible. The second fell when a section of corridor wall turned out to be a disguised maintenance panel that Kane had converted into a trap. By the time the remaining mechanoids realized they were being hunted rather than hunting, half their unit was offline. The station's security forces tried to respond to the growing chaos, but they found their own systems working against them. Blast doors sealed randomly, trapping security teams in sections where nothing was happening while leaving other areas completely unguarded. Communication networks carried false information, sending reinforcements to empty rooms while real battles raged elsewhere. The Coalition's fourth team was composed of ethereal beings, gaseous entities contained within environmental suits. They had been confident that their unique physiology would make them immune to whatever tactics Kane was using against the others. They discovered their mistake when their environmental suits began developing leaks, not obvious failures that would trigger immediate alarms, but subtle breaches that slowly altered their atmospheric composition. By the time they realized what was happening, their cognitive functions were already compromised. Kane appeared among them like a ghost, moving through their formation and systematically shutting down their life support systems. The ethereal's gaseous forms dissipated harmlessly, returning to the station's atmosphere, while their consciousness retreated to backup storage systems. "All teams report," Counselor Vex demanded over the Coalition's communication network. His voice carried an edge of panic that was unusual for a Zephyrian. The responses were fragmentary and disturbing. Blue team, eliminated. Target using unknown methods. Red team compromised. Station systems corrupted. Gold team, environmental failure. Can't maintain cohesion. Vex realized with growing horror that their carefully planned operation was collapsing. More than collapsing, they were being systematically destroyed by a single being who seemed to have turned the entire station into his weapon. "Fall back to Central Command," Vex ordered. "All units converge on Council chambers. We make our stand there." But Kane had other plans. The station's central computer core was located in a heavily shielded section deep within the structure's heart. It controlled everything from life support to artificial gravity, and it was supposed to be accessible only to the station's highest-ranking personnel. Kane had been inside it for an hour. The technical specifications he had studied during his diplomatic preparation hadn't just covered council procedures and cultural protocols. They had included detailed schematics of the station itself, information that Earth's intelligence services had acquired through methods that Kane preferred not to think about too closely. From the computer core, Kane could see everything happening on the station. Every camera, every sensor, every communication channel was at his disposal. He watched the Coalition's forces retreat toward the council chambers and smiled grimly. They thought they were falling back to a position of strength. What they were actually doing was gathering themselves into a single location where Kane could deal with them all at once. The remaining Coalition forces reached the council chambers and began setting up defensive positions. They had brought heavy weapons and portable shields, determined to make their final stand in the most symbolic location possible. Counselor Vex stood at the center of the chamber, his silver eyes blazing with fury and fear. Around him, representatives from a dozen species prepared for what they believed would be a climactic battle. They waited for Kane to come to them. Instead, the chamber's artificial gravity reversed. Beings who had expected to fight from cover found themselves falling toward the ceiling, their weapons and equipment scattering in all directions. Emergency magnetic locks engaged randomly, trapping some Coalition members while leaving others floating helplessly in midair. The chamber's atmospheric composition began to shift, becoming hostile to several species while remaining perfectly breathable for humans. Energy weapons overloaded as their targeting systems received conflicting data from the station's sensors. Through it all, Kane's voice echoed through the chamber's communication system, calm and professional as always. "This is Ambassador Marcus Kane," he announced. "I'm formally requesting that all Coalition forces stand down immediately. What you're experiencing is a demonstration of why Earth's government prefers diplomatic solutions to conflicts." Counselor Vex, struggling to maintain his position in the shifting gravity, screamed his defiance at the chamber's speakers. "You're a monster, a killer pretending to be a diplomat." Kane's response was quiet and matter-of-fact. I'm exactly what Earth told you I was, Counselor. Their diplomatic representative. They just didn't mention that diplomacy is only my current job. The chaos in the chamber stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Gravity returned to normal, the atmosphere stabilized, and the emergency system shut down. Coalition forces found themselves disarmed, but unharmed, their weapons having mysteriously disappeared during the confusion. Kane's voice continued from the speakers, now carrying a colder undertone. Earth's government retired me from my previous position, specifically because they wanted to pursue peaceful relations with the galaxy. But they also wanted you to understand that our preference for diplomacy comes from choice, not weakness. A long silence filled the chamber as the implications of Kane's words sank in. If this is what you call a diplomat, whispered one of the surviving mechanoids, what do you call a soldier? Kane's answer chilled every being in the chamber. You don't want to find out. Dawn Cycle arrived on the council station with an eerie quiet. The night's events had left over 30 coalition operatives in the medical bay, all suffering from various forms of non-lethal but highly effective incapacitation. Not one of them had died, a fact that somehow made the entire situation more terrifying rather than less. Marcus Kane appeared in the council chambers at precisely 0800, wearing a fresh suit and carrying his diplomatic briefcase as if nothing unusual had happened. He took his position at the speaking platform and waited patiently for the session to begin. The chamber filled slowly, with delegates casting nervous glances at the human who stood calmly at the center of the sphere. Many seats remained empty. Their occupants were either recovering in medical facilities or had suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere in the galaxy. Counselor Vex, his silver eyes now showing something that might have been respect mixed with fear, called the session to order with a voice that carried less authority than usual. The council recognizes Ambassador Kane of Earth, Vex announced, though the words seemed to stick in his throat. Kane smiled politely and activated the translation system. Thank you, Counselor. I'd like to begin by apologizing for the regrettable incidents that occurred last night. I hope all injured parties make full recoveries. A ripple of nervous laughter echoed through the chamber. The idea of Kane apologizing for defending himself against multiple assassination attempts struck many delegates as surreal. I understand there may be some confusion about my qualifications and background, Kane continued, his tone remaining diplomatic despite discussing the previous night's violence. Earth's government thought it might be helpful if I clarified a few things. The chamber fell completely silent. Every delegate present understood that they were about to learn something significant about the human species, and possibly about their own future survival. Earth selected me for this mission because of my unique combination of skills, Kane explained. I have extensive diplomatic training and genuine experience in conflict resolution. But I also have a background that my government hoped would never become relevant. Kane paused, allowing the translation systems to catch up before continuing. Before becoming Earth's diplomatic representative, I served in what your databases would classify as special operations. My job was to eliminate threats that conventional military forces couldn't handle. Rogue artificial intelligences, genetically modified super soldiers, entities that had transcended normal physical limitations. The crystalline Vorthon delegate, one of the few who had survived the previous night, chimed a question that sounded like breaking bells. How many such threats did you eliminate? Kane considered the question carefully. In 15 years of active service, I stopped counting after the first 100. Shocked silence filled the chamber. Even species that considered themselves apex predators began to understand that they might be dealing with something beyond their experience. Why are you telling us this? Asked the Altarian delegate, diplomatic aide Velna, who had been among Kane's few supporters from the beginning. Because Earth's government wants you to understand why we prefer diplomacy, Kane replied simply, not because we're weak or afraid of conflict, but because we know exactly what conflict costs. Kane gestured around the chamber, encompassing the hundreds of delegates who watched him with new understanding. Last night, some of you decided to test human capabilities through violence. You learned that one retired human operative could neutralize multiple teams of elite soldiers without causing permanent harm. Now imagine what would happen if Earth felt threatened enough to deploy active military personnel. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If Kane represented what humans considered a diplomat, What would their actual soldiers be capable of? Earth has military forces? Asked a delegate from a species that resembled giant metallic insects. Kane's smile grew slightly colder. Earth has been at war with itself for most of its recorded history. We've developed methods of conflict that your species haven't needed to consider because you've had galactic civilization to prevent total warfare. Such as? Pressed the insectoid delegate. Weapons that can sterilize planets from interstellar distances, ships that exist partially outside normal spacetime, soldiers who've been enhanced beyond baseline human limitations. Kane's voice remained conversational, as if he were discussing weather patterns, technologies that we developed because on Earth you either became very good at warfare or you went extinct. The chamber erupted in frightened discussions. Delegates who had spent the last few days debating whether humans deserved council membership were now confronting the possibility that they had been thinking about the situation entirely wrong. Commander Thrak, who had been released from medical care that morning, struggled to his feet despite his injuries. The massive Drakmari warrior looked directly at Kane and asked the question that everyone was thinking. If your species possesses such capabilities, why haven't you used them? Why send a single diplomat instead of a fleet of warships? Kane's expression softened slightly, showing the first genuine emotion he had displayed since arriving at the station. Because we've learned something that many species never discover, Commander. Being able to destroy something doesn't mean you should. Having the power to take what you want doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Kane looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of species. Earth's government didn't send me here to threaten you or to demand membership through intimidation. They sent me here to prove that humans can choose cooperation over conquest, even when conquest would be easier. Councillor Vex, who had led the opposition to human membership, spoke in a voice that trembled slightly. And if the Council rejects your petition? If we decide that humans are too dangerous to allow into galactic civilization? Kane's answer was immediate and unwavering. Then we'll respect your decision and return to Earth. We'll continue developing our own civilization and leave the galaxy to its current inhabitants. But we'll also remember that we tried diplomacy first. The threat was implicit but clear. Earth wouldn't force its way into galactic civilization. But rejection would mean that the galaxy's first contact with humans had ended in failure. Future encounters might not be handled by diplomats. The formal vote was called that afternoon. Unlike the contentious debates of previous days, the discussion was brief and subdued. Delegate after delegate stood to address the chamber, and their message was remarkably consistent. The Altarian Republic votes to admit Earth to Council membership, Velna announced. We believe humanity has demonstrated both the capability and the wisdom necessary for galactic citizenship. The Drakmari Imperium seconds this motion, Commander Thrak declared, his voice carrying new respect. We have tested human strength and found it worthy of our alliance. Even former opponents found reasons to support human membership. The Zephyrian delegate, who had called humans primitive only days before, now spoke of the value of diverse perspectives and evolutionary vigor. The crystalline Vorthan representative chimed her agreement, noting that entities capable of such restraint in the face of provocation demonstrate advanced civilization. When the final vote was tallied, Earth's admission to the Galactic Council was unanimous, not because every delegate believed humans belonged, but because none of them wanted to be responsible for rejecting a species that might someday return with less diplomatic intentions. Kane accepted the Council's decision with the same professional grace he had shown throughout the process. He thanked the delegates for their consideration and promised that Earth would prove worthy of their trust. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, many of them cast nervous glances at the human who had fundamentally changed their understanding of galactic power dynamics. Later that evening, Kane transmitted his mission report back to Earth using the station's quantum communication array. His summary was characteristically concise. Mission successful. Council has voted unanimously to grant Earth full membership, including permanent seats on both the diplomatic and security committees. First contact proceeded better than projected parameters. My cover as a diplomatic representative remains intact. Kane paused before adding the final line of his report. Recommend continued emphasis on diplomatic solutions for future galactic interactions. However, Council members now understand that Earth's preference for peaceful resolution stems from choice rather than necessity. This should facilitate more productive negotiations going forward. He closed the transmission and returned to his quarters to pack. The diplomatic mission was complete, and Earth's integration into galactic civilization could begin in earnest. As he folded his clothes with the same precise care he had shown throughout his stay, Kane reflected on the irony of his situation. Earth's government had retired him from active military service specifically to pursue peaceful relations with the galaxy. They had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. Humanity now had a seat at the galactic table, with all the opportunities and responsibilities that entailed. And everyone in the galaxy knew that humans preferred diplomacy, not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to choose restraint. Thank you for watching and comment for next part.